Welcome to another episode of Paul vs. Paranormal. We are back again just for Halloween. Not just for Halloween, but with another one of the Computer Does the Stories for Us episode, because, we can't really read these stories ourselves because we're not very good. You've heard Robert talk. It's awful.
Good speaking I don't do.
So, sit back, relax, stick on a candle or two, have a Baileys, or whatever drink you like. Turn off the lights. Relax again, even more. Be creeped out if you want. Please be creeped out. If you're not going to be creeped out, I'll send Robert round. Yeah. First story, I've just gone with a basic, please tell me a ghost story for Halloween.
I see.
So let's see what the internet comes up with.
On a crisp Halloween night in the small village of Hartwell, a local legend stirred once again. It was said that every year, on October 31st, the Lady of Blackthorn Manor returned. No one knew much about her, only that centuries ago, the manor's mistress, Lady Eliza Blackthorn, vanished without a trace. Her husband was found wandering the halls, muttering about how the shadows took her. After that, the house fell into ruin, and people steered clear of it, except on Halloween, when lights were seen flickering in the windows. Sarah and her friends didn't believe the stories. They were thrill seekers, looking for a good scare. So when Halloween came around, they decided to spend the night at Blackthorn Manor. Armed with flashlights and a few snacks, they ventured into the mansion just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was thick with dust, and the old wooden floors creaked under their feet. They explored room after room, laughing off their nervousness, until they found the Grand Hall, a vast open space with a towering fireplace and cobweb-covered chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. As they settled down to tell ghost stories, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and a cold breeze seemed to rush through the hall, even though the windows were sealed. Sarah shivered and pulled her jacket tighter. "That's weird," Nate muttered, glancing around. "Did anyone else feel that?" Before anyone could answer, a soft sobbing sound echoed through the room. They froze. The sound seemed to come from the grand staircase, where a faint, ghostly figure appeared. It was a woman, pale and translucent, her long black dress trailing behind her as she slowly descended the stairs. Her eyes, hollow and sorrowful, were fixed on the floor, her hands clutching something tightly to her chest. "That's not real," Sarah whispered, but no one moved. The ghost reached the bottom of the stairs and stood motionless, staring at the group with empty eyes. Then, with a sudden movement, she raised her hand and pointed directly at Sarah. "No?" The ghost's voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "No more shadows? Please, no more shadows." Suddenly, the room was filled with a violent gust of wind. The lights from their flashlights flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the group, and in the chaos, they heard heavy footsteps, running, frantic, and the same heart-wrenching sobbing. When the lights flickered back on, Sarah was standing alone. Her friends were gone, and the ghost was now standing just inches from her, her cold, lifeless hand reaching out. Sarah stumbled back, heart racing, but the woman didn't move closer. Instead, she began to fade, her sorrowful eyes still locked onto Sarah's. "You must leave," the ghost whispered, her voice barely audible, "or they will take you too." Terrified, Sarah bolted for the door, her breath catching in her throat as she ran through the dark halls of Blackthorn Manor. She didn't stop until she reached the village, panting and shaking. No one ever found her friends, and Sarah was left with the knowledge that Blackthorn Manor's curse was very real. Every Halloween, the lady returned, not to haunt, but to warn. Because once the shadows claimed you, they never let you go.
Ooh, creepy. I like the ones where the friends don't survive.
Yeah. There's always one friend left to tell the tale, and
Yeah.
the suspicion ends up being that friend is the one who did a murder. I'm the only one who escaped. Why are you covered in blood? Must be shadows.
tomato sauce. I went for some pasta on the way home.
I slaughtered a lamb on the way back.
Yeah.
They needed me to
But
do it
you
for 'em.
see, I'm also part of a cult, and Wednesday nights we sacrifice the odd lamb.
Yeah.
This one I've decided to ask for a Halloween story about driving.
Right, okay.
Something I don't do, and neither do you.
No, so this will be be complete foreign territory to us.
I don't know what a car is.
Yeah. What is driving?
So it's a Halloween story about driving. So let's go.
Chris Rea's involved.
It was late Halloween night, and James was driving home from a party in a small town just outside of the city. The back roads were empty, the air crisp, and the only light came from the full moon overhead. His car's headlights sliced through the thick fog that had rolled in, making the road feel like it stretched into nowhere. He had heard all the stories about these roads, about how people would disappear, how strange figures were sometimes spotted walking alone late at night, but he'd always shrugged them off as urban legends. Tonight, though, there was an unsettling stillness in the air, the kind that made your skin crawl. James turned onto a narrow, winding road that cut through a dense forest. The fog grew even thicker, swirling around the trees like something alive. He turned the radio down, his grip tightening on the wheel as the silence closed in. Then, just up ahead, he saw something. A figure standing in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure was a woman, wearing a long, old-fashioned white dress, her hair hanging limp and wet over her face. She was just standing there, unmoving, her head slightly tilted as if she was listening for something. James's heart raced. He honked the horn, hoping she'd move, but she didn't even flinch. The idea of getting out to check on her sent a chill down his spine, but he couldn't just leave her there. Maybe she's hurt, he muttered to himself, trying to summon some courage. Slowly, James got out of the car, keeping the door open behind him. He approached the woman cautiously, his shoes crunching on the gravel. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out, his voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. As he got closer, he noticed something odd. Her skin was pale, too pale, like it had never seen sunlight. And her dress? It was dripping wet, as if she had just climbed out of a lake, even though there wasn't any water for miles. His instinct screamed at him to turn around, to get back in the car, but something about her kept him frozen in place. When he was only a few feet away, she finally moved. Slowly, she raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were dark, empty pits, hollow, black, and full of something ancient and cold. James stumbled back, his heart racing, but before he could react, she whispered in a voice that sounded like it had come from deep underwater. "Can you take me home?" Panicked, he turned and bolted for the car, slamming the door shut. He floored the gas, tires screeching as he sped down the road. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror, his blood ran cold. She was sitting in the back seat. Her hollow eyes stared straight ahead, her wet hair dripping onto the seats. She didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, as if she'd always been there. James's hands trembled on the wheel. He pressed harder on the gas, his heart racing, praying that she'd disappear, that this was all some kind of nightmare. But the faster he drove, the closer her presence seemed to cling to him, like an icy weight in the car. Then, in a voice so faint he could barely hear it, she whispered again, "Can you take me home?" James swerved off the road, screeching to a halt. His heart pounded in his chest as he whipped around to look at the back seat. It was empty. No trace of her, no wet dress, no cold stare, nothing. He sat there, gasping for breath, trying to calm his racing heart. For what felt like an eternity, he stared into the dark woods around him, his mind spinning. Gathering what little courage he had left, James drove home, the roads now empty and silent. But that night, and every Halloween after, he never took that road again. Because sometimes, the lost ones don't just want to ride. They want to take you with them.
So was the fear in that one that she wet the back seats, or...?
I think he was just crapping himself.
Yeah, I think he wet the back seats.
Yeah, he wet the old car, didn't he?
Yeah. But yeah, that was cool. That was kind of creepy. Ghost stories about people driving are quite interesting. Then, surprisingly, not as few and far between as you'd probably imagine there would be.
Yeah.
There's been plenty of ghost stories about people picking up phantom hitchhikers.
Yeah. And this is why you keep an iron bar and some salt in your car with you.
This is why you don't drive.
Yeah, and why we don't drive.
You don't have to have that problem. If you don't drive, you don't have to pick up hitchhikers. You don't have to pick up ghostly hitchhikers.
But if you're a passenger, you want to make sure that you're sat away from the wet hair because you can
You
get
don't
wet.
want to be sat next to the ghost. That's not great. Imagine there's three of you in the car. The two front seats are occupied, and you're sat in the back, and they pick up the hitchhiker who's a ghost, and they sit in the back seat, and they're absolutely soaking wet.
Dripping
Or they
on
just
your arm.
materialise next to you. Sorry, you scoot over a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you mind? I was sat here first.
Yeah. What are you doing, sat on my knee? Oh, sorry, bud.
Yeah, the ghost happens to be a overweight, middle-aged bloke with
Dressed like a lumberjack.
dressed like a lumberjack. It's not water that's dripping off from its blood.
Do you want to type a story?
You want me to make a story? You
Yeah,
sure that's a
you
good
might.
idea?
Rob's story is now ready to go.
Here we go.
So I'm just going to put a disclaimer out there. I apologise now because I know what Robert's like. It's probably going to be bad.
It'll be rubbish, but
Let's go.
It was supposed to be just another fun episode of their paranormal podcast. Jake and Andy, co-hosts of The Unbelievables, had built their audience on the back of skepticism and sarcasm. Every week, they'd dive into some bizarre, spooky tale, laughing and picking apart the weirdest paranormal encounters they could find. But tonight, they were focusing on something a little more controversial. A local police officer's UFO sighting in their small town. Officer Mike Dugan, a well-respected cop, had claimed to see a UFO hovering over the fields outside town one night. He had described the ship in vivid detail, spinning lights, metallic surfaces, and a sense that something had been watching him. Naturally, Jake and Andy couldn't resist mocking the story. For the entire episode, they joked about aliens on the payroll and how Officer Dugan had probably just seen a drone after a few too many beers. Maybe the aliens were just looking for some donuts, Andy quipped, laughing into the mic. Jake chimed in, or Dugan's waiting for the men in black to recruit him. They wrapped up the episode, both feeling pretty satisfied with the content. Their listeners loved these kinds of episodes, where no paranormal story was sacred and no local legend was safe from their jokes. But things started to get weird the next day. Jake was the first to notice. He came out of his apartment that morning to find all 4 tires on his car slashed. At first, he thought it was just bad luck or some random vandalism. But when he texted Andy about it, Andy sent back a picture of his own car, covered in spray paint with the word liars scrawled across the side. "What the hell?" Jake texted. "I don't know, man. Weirdos out here. Probably some UFO nut who didn't like the episode," Andy replied. They shrugged it off and went on with their day. But as the week went on, things got stranger. Jake started getting calls late at night from unknown numbers. When he answered, there'd be nothing but heavy breathing on the other end, followed by a click. Andy found dead birds on his doorstep 2 mornings in a row, their eyes gouged out. Then, one evening, just as they were about to record their next episode, a notification pinged on Jake's phone. An email, subject line, "You shouldn't have laughed." The message inside was simple. "Meet me at the old airstrip outside of town, midnight, or I'll come find you." Jake showed Andy the email, his stomach sinking. "This is starting to freak me out." "Probably just some lunatic messing with us," Andy said, though his voice was less confident than usual. "Let's just ignore it." But the tension between them was palpable. Neither of them wanted to admit it, but they both knew there was only one person who could be this angry: Officer Dugan. He had been ridiculed in front of their audience, and if anyone had the resources to mess with them like this, it was him. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Jake tossed and turned, every creak of his apartment sending his heart racing. By 11:30, he'd had enough. He grabbed his jacket and his car keys, texting Andy, "I'm going to the airstrip. You coming?" Andy responded immediately, "You're insane. I'm in." The old airstrip was a long-abandoned place, hidden just outside the town limits, where few dared to go at night. Its crumbling tarmac and rusting hangars had been home to local ghost stories for years. Jake and Andy pulled up in separate cars, both their headlights cutting through the fog that hung low over the empty field. "Great place for a horror movie," Andy muttered as they stood by their cars, looking around. "If this is a prank, I'm gonna—" A sudden flash of light interrupted him. It wasn't just from above, it was all around them, lighting up the field like it was noon. Both men jumped, spinning toward the source of the light. Officer Dugan's patrol car, parked on the far side of the airstrip. He stepped out slowly, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the fog. Dugan didn't look like the easygoing cop they'd seen around town. His eyes were wild, his face pale under the harsh light, and in his hand, he clutched a gun. "You think this is a joke?" Dugan's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You think what I saw was funny?" Jake's throat went dry. "Look, Officer Dugan, we were just what?" Dugan barked, stepping closer. "Just making fun of the truth? You've never seen what's out there. You wouldn't be laughing if you had." The men backed away slowly as Dugan raised the gun, aiming it directly at them. "They're watching us," Dugan muttered. "You don't get it? They know who doubts them. They know who mocks them." Wait, Andy stammered, hands up. "You're serious? You really believe they're coming for you?" "They came," Dugan said, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. "And now I'm going to make sure they don't come for you next." Before either of them could react, the sky above them lit up once more, this time with something unnatural. A blinding, pulsating light descended from the clouds, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. Dugan froze, his eyes wide with terror, his grip on the gun faltering. "They're here," Dugan whispered, backing away from the light. "They're finally here." Jake and Andy didn't wait to find out what happened next. They bolted back to their cars, peeling out of the airstrip as fast as they could. In the rearview mirror, Jake caught one last glimpse of Dugan, standing motionless under the strange light, before he disappeared into the fog. They never found Officer Dugan. The next morning, his patrol car was gone, and no one in town seemed to know what had happened to him. The podcast? Jake and Andy never made another episode.
Was that it? Finished
That's
there?
it, yeah, that's where it ended. Wow, it's nice to have a follow-up on Officer Mike Dugan after his encounter. We now know that he's actually now a missing person. So next week's episode, the true story of Officer Mike Dugan.
Oh, dear.
UFO abduction or missing persons case.
Yeah. Remind me of the previous story of Mike Dugan. I seem to have forgotten this one.
He was the cop who saw a UFO in the previous story. That was literally it. He saw a UFO.
Oh.
He called it in. They didn't believe him, so he didn't call it in again.
Of course, yeah. He didn't tell him again. Yeah, I'm with you. That's pretty smart. They actually remembered that.
Reused the same detail.
That was
the same characters.
That was literally the part one, wasn't it? That we did of the AI stories. Holy crap!
Part one, you hear of Officer Mike Dugan encountering UFO, and now we find out he's missing. I'm just gonna play this one. Let you listen.
Yeah, okay. It's a surprise for everyone then.
Yeah. It was Halloween night, and three friends, Mia, Jack, and Ethan, set out for what they thought would be a typical evening of trick-or-treating. They'd been through most of the neighborhood, their bags already heavy with candy, when Jack stopped in his tracks, pointing toward the far end of the street. "Hey, what about that place?" he asked. The house he pointed to stood at the edge of town, old and forgotten. No one had lived there for decades, and the kids in school always said it was haunted. Its windows were dark, its paint peeling, and the front gate hung askew, creaking in the light breeze. But on this Halloween night, a single jack-o'-lantern glowed faintly on the porch. "You've got to be kidding," Mia said, crossing her arms. "That place? No way." "Oh, come on, it's just a house," Ethan replied with a grin. "Let's see if anyone's giving out candy." Reluctantly, Mia followed them. The closer they got, the colder the air seemed to become. A low fog had settled around the yard, and the trees surrounding the house seemed to lean in as if itching. They walked up the creaky front steps, and Jack knocked on the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just when they were about to turn and leave, the door swung open with a long, groaning creak. The hallway beyond was dark, except for the faint flicker of candlelight deeper inside. "Hello?" Jack called out, but no one answered. "Okay. We should definitely leave," Mia whispered, her voice shaky. "Hold on," Ethan said, already stepping inside. "What if there's candy bowls inside? It's Halloween, remember?" Jack followed him, more curious than afraid, but Mia hesitated at the threshold. The air inside the house was thick and cold, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees the moment they crossed into the doorway. Still, not wanting to be left behind, she stepped in too. As they moved deeper into the house, the flickering light revealed more of the old, decaying interior. Dust-covered furniture, torn wallpaper, and cobwebs hung in every corner. The flickering candlelight led them down a long hallway to a large living room. In the center of the room stood a table, and on the table sat 3 neatly wrapped packages. "Check this out," Jack said, stepping forward. "Maybe it's some kind of Halloween setup." He reached for one of the packages, but as soon as his fingers touched the paper, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the house, and the candlelight flickered violently, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. "Did the wind do that?" Ethan asked, though he didn't sound convinced. "Let's just get out of here," Mia insisted, backing toward the door. But when she grabbed the handle and tried to pull, it wouldn't budge. Panic started to creep into their voices. They all tried pulling at the door. They weren't, but it was like something or someone was holding it shut. Then, from somewhere deeper in the house, they heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper. At first, it was too faint to make out, but as it grew louder, the words became clearer. "Who's come to my house?" Jack froze, his heart racing. "Did you guys hear that?" Before anyone could respond, the candle on the table blew out, plunging them into darkness. Mia screamed, and Ethan fumbled for his phone, switching on the flashlight. The narrow beam of light cut through the darkness, but it did little to calm their nerves. The whispers started again, this time closer. "You shouldn't have come." Suddenly, the shadows on the walls seemed to move, stretching and twisting, forming the shape of a figure. The air grew icy, and a cold breeze swept through the room, though none of the windows were open. The figure materialized from the darkness, a pale woman in a long, tattered dress, her face hollow and eyes sunken. "You've come to take what's mine," the ghostly figure whispered, her voice filled with sorrow and rage. "Now you'll stay. Forever." The friends backed away, hearts pounding, but the figure moved closer, her presence freezing the very air around them. The shadows seemed to close in, pressing against them from every side. "We need to get out of here," Mia screamed. Desperate, Ethan shined the light toward the packages on the table. "Maybe it's some kind of test," he yelled. "We need to open these." Jack, shaking, tore open the nearest package. Inside was an old, rusted key. "The door," he shouted. "Maybe it's for the door." But when he tried to use the key, it wouldn't fit the lock. The figure came closer, her whispers now a chilling hum filling the air. Jack frantically tried again, but it was no use. "We have to open the other ones," Ethan yelled. Mia grabbed the second package and ripped it open. Inside was a cracked, dusty mirror. Confused, she held it up just as the ghostly woman reached for her. But when the ghost saw her reflection, she recoiled, her form flickering and distorting in the dim light. "You shouldn't be here," the ghost rasped, her voice trembling as she stared at the reflection of her own decaying face. "Leave, before it's too late." Without wasting another second, Ethan grabbed the third package and tore it open. Inside was a small, worn locket. As soon as he opened it, the figure let out a piercing scream, vanishing into the shadows. The door suddenly swung open. Not waiting for an explanation, the 3 friends bolted out of the house, their breaths ragged as they sprinted down the street, not stopping until they were far, far away. Later, when they had caught their breath and were far enough from the haunted house, Ethan opened the locket again. Inside was a faded photograph of the woman they had seen, a young, beautiful version of the ghost that had nearly trapped them inside her house forever. They never spoke of that night again. But every Halloween, when they passed the house at the edge of town, they couldn't help but wonder if anyone else would be brave or foolish enough to knock on its door, because they knew the ghost inside would still be waiting.
And that's the story of how...
And that's how I met your mother.
How 3 friends went trick-or-treating and met a ghost. I think we could probably squeeze one more in. I'll let you do it.
Right, okay.
Okay, this is the final story, and it's another one prompted by Rob, so... Again, sorry.
If it's bad, I ain't apologising.
It's not bad, it's probably going to be gross.
Carrie had always hated mannequins, Ever since he was a kid, they freaked him out. Those lifeless, glassy eyes, frozen smiles, and unnatural poses that seemed just a little too human. So, when he ended up working the night shift at a clothing store filled with mannequins, it felt like some kind of cruel joke. But a job was a job, and he needed the money. It was Halloween night, and the store was dead quiet. All the customers had gone home hours ago, and the only sound was the faint hum of the store's fluorescent lights. The mannequins stood throughout the aisles, dressed in fall fashion, their stiff poses catching Terry's eye every time he walked by. He tried to avoid looking at them, but it was impossible. They were everywhere, and no matter how much he told himself they were just plastic and plaster, his skin crawled every time he felt one of their gazes on him. The store had a particularly eerie atmosphere that night. Maybe it was the holiday, or maybe it was just his imagination running wild. Either way, Terry couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. He'd lock eyes with a mannequin, glance away for a moment, and when he looked back, it seemed like they had shifted just slightly. A hand turned at a different angle, a head tilted in a way that felt wrong. By the time the clock hit midnight, Terry was on edge. He had another hour before closing up, and all he wanted was to get out of there. As he walked through the store, tidying up and restocking shelves, a loud thud made him freeze. It had come from the back room. Terry's heart pounded in his chest. Probably just a box fell over, he muttered to himself, trying to stay calm. But deep down, he knew that wasn't it. He hadn't been back there all night, and nothing should have been moving. Slowly, he made his way to the back room, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The storage area was dimly lit, rows of mannequins waiting to be dressed and displayed scattered throughout. Terry's hands shook as he turned on the light. That's when he saw it. One of the mannequins lay crumpled on the floor, as if it had fallen from its stand. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. Its hand was reaching out, bent at an unnatural angle toward the door, as though it had been crawling toward him. And the worst part? Its head was turned directly toward Terry, its lifeless eyes locked onto his. Terry backed away, his heart hammering. "No, no, no," he whispered, stumbling back into the store. But as he stepped out of the back room, he froze. The mannequins in the store had moved. Every single one of them. Their poses were different, subtly at first, but now they seemed to be facing him, their blank faces tilted in his direction. He felt the world closing in on him. A chill ran down his spine as he slowly turned to leave. But then he heard it, a faint scraping sound. It started softly, barely audible, but it grew louder and closer. He glanced back. The mannequins were moving. Not jerking or shifting subtly, but full-on walking toward him, their stiff limbs cracking as they moved unnaturally fast across the store. Panic seized Terry. He ran. His feet pounded against the tiled floor, his breaths ragged and desperate as he made for the exit. But when he reached the glass doors, they wouldn't budge. He fumbled for his keys, his hands trembling, but his mind raced too fast to think straight. The scraping sound grew louder behind him, and when he turned, he saw them. Dozens of mannequins, their plastic mouths twisted into grotesque, silent screams, their arms outstretched, fingers like claws. They were closing in. Terry screamed, his voice hoarse, as one of the mannequins grabbed his arm. Its grip was impossibly strong, cold and hard as it pulled him toward the horde. Another mannequin latched onto his leg, and Terry felt something snap inside him, like his very bones were being crushed under their vice-like grips. He struggled, kicking and thrashing, but there were too many. The mannequins dragged him to the floor, their blank faces expressionless as they began tearing at his clothes, scratching his skin with jagged plastic hands. They didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but the torture was relentless. His skin burned as they cut into him, dragging him across the floor toward the dark back of the store. Through the pain, Terry managed to grab a nearby shelf, yanking himself free for just a moment. He saw a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall and lunged for it, swinging wildly at the mannequins. The heavy metal connected with a sickening crunch, sending plastic limbs flying. He didn't stop. Adrenaline pumping, Terry smashed his way through the crowd, clearing a path. The mannequins flailed, some of them falling apart as he made his way toward the emergency exit in the back. Finally, with one last desperate swing, he broke through the door, stumbling out into the cold night air. He collapsed onto the pavement, panting and bleeding, his body trembling with shock. The store loomed behind him, but the mannequins didn't follow. The police found him hours later, yet babbling incoherently about the mannequins coming to life, about their dead eyes and cold, crushing hands. But when they searched the store, everything was in perfect order. Not a single mannequin was out of place, and the cameras showed nothing but static during the time of his attack. No one believed Terry. Not the police, not his coworkers, not his friends. The store claimed he'd had a breakdown, but Terry knew the truth. The mannequins had come for him, and they'd almost gotten what they wanted. He left town that night, never looking back. But even now, whenever he passes a department store window or a clothing shop display, he feels their eyes on him, waiting, watching, because they weren't done with him yet. They never would be.
Yeah. Mannequins. No, never been my favourite things. I mean, I've worked in shops that used mannequins and always creep me out.
There was a reason I did that story.
Yeah. So, right.
It's just kind of put a downer on end of the whole thing now. It's like, oh, shit, I'm going to be having nightmares now.
Yeah.
And on next week's podcast,
Back to the mannequins. So yeah, I've never been a fan of mannequins, as you rightly point out there, and the reason you brought that story. I was literally had shivers down my spine going with that story, because I've been alone in basements with mannequins. I've been in stock rooms with mannequins that did move, only they were moved by people, shoved down the middle of aisles that they shouldn't be in. So it makes you jump because you didn't expect to see someone that stood there.
And you'll admit this, you are quite jumpy.
I am not quite jumpy, yeah.
So.
I do jump quite a lot. I jump a lot and I cry a lot more. I'm a man.
It's not being jumpy, it's you have intense reactions. Your reaction speed is ridiculously quick.
Yeah, when it comes to horror things. Yeah.
You turn a corner as a mannequin and you're already flying up like Bruce Lee to kick its head.
Yeah.
Without actually flying up off a floor, you just jump.
Yeah. I just turn and run away. Not a fan of mannequins, never will be. And that's about all I've got to say on mannequins.
The actual the story itself was quite a good one, I think. That.
Oh yeah. Back to the actual story. Yeah, that was pretty good.
Oh yeah.
It would make a very interesting episode of like a short live action TV show or animation.
Or a short video game if somebody was keen on making
there's been plenty of mannequin games about mannequins, I've played enough of them, stupidly.
So I don't know what I'm going to say. Of all the phobias that you have, I think the mannequin one's probably the worst.
Mannequins carrying balloons.
Oh, yeah.
Mannequins blowing up balloons, even worse.
Yeah, I'm going to say the possibility of those balloons popping.
And on that note, we'll see you on the next.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that's going to wrap up another chilling episode of Paul vs. the Paranormal. We've uncovered some eerie encounters tonight, but remember, the truth is always out there, whether you believe in it or not. And if tonight's stories didn't give you goosebumps, then maybe you're braver than we are, or just in denial. But hey, we'll be back next week to test your nerves again. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single spine-tingling episode. And if you've got your own paranormal experiences, send them our way. Who knows? Your story might be next. And if you're listening in the dark, good luck getting to sleep tonight. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, sometimes the scariest thing is what you can't explain. Thanks for joining us on Paul vs. the Paranormal. Until next time. Keep looking over your shoulder